I was hired to be a millionaire's bride, my romance story. Emily Parker leaned against the chipped kitchen counter, staring at the stack of unpaid bills. Her fingers traced the edge of a worn envelope addressed in red letters, the kind that signaled urgency or doom. Outside, the rain painted the windows with blurred streaks of gray, a fitting mood for the Tuesday that already felt too heavy. Teaching high school literature in a Portland suburb was never meant to be glamorous, but it had meaning. Or so Emily kept telling herself. But meaning did not pay the mortgage. After her parents' passing, the house they left behind had become a sanctuary and a burden. She was drowning, and every month the water crept higher. A ping from her phone broke the silence. It was a message from Rachel Morgan, an old college friend she had not spoken to in years. Just a simple line. "Coffee tomorrow? Need to talk." Big opportunity. Emily almost ignored it, but something in the message stirred her curiosity. Rachel had always been ambitious, the kind of woman who wore confidence like a tailored coat. The next day, they met at a quiet cafe near the university campus, and after the obligatory hugs and updates, Rachel dropped the bomb. "I need to ask you something completely insane," she said, stirring her latte with the kind of dramatic pause only she could pull off. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Rachel leaned closer. "You'd be compensated well. There's a man, a client, he needs a wife, temporarily, strictly legal." Emily blinked. "Like fake marriage?" Rachel nodded. "Arrangement. Real on paper, pretend in public, no strings, no expectations, just an, that sounds like fraud." "It's not. It's complicated but legal. There's a will, involved inheritance stuff, his grandfather's estate. He needs a wife before a certain date or he loses everything." Emily laughed. "Why not hire an actress?" "He doesn't want someone flashy. He needs someone believable, honest, low profile. You're perfect. I wouldn't have come to you if I didn't think you could do this." Emily shook her head, trying to suppress a nervous chuckle. "I'm a high school teacher, not a con artist. You're also behind on your mortgage. Your car's 2 months from being repossessed, and you're working 2 side gigs to afford groceries. This isn't a crime, it's a business deal." Rachel slid a manila envelope across the table. Emily hesitated before opening it. Inside was a photograph of a man, early 30s, sharp suit, cold eyes, handsome in a magazine cover way, but utterly unapproachable. Daniel Whitmore. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Who is he? Tech investor, reclusive, very private. You'll meet him before anything's signed. Emily stared at the photo, then back at Rachel. "And the payment?" Rachel hesitated. "Ends. $250,000, half up front, half after the term." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It was an impossible number, a life-changing number. Her brain screamed that it was a scam, but Rachel's tone was serious, the offer genuine. $250,000. She looked out the window at the wet streets of Portland. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, hopeful heart. Was it madness to even consider it? "I need time," she murmured. "Of course," Rachel said, her tone softening. "Just think about it. You'll get a call tomorrow. If you say yes, I'll arrange the meeting. If you say no, I disappear, and you forget all of this." That night, Emily sat on her living room floor surrounded by bills and memories, her mother's old quilt wrapped around her shoulders, the silence of the house pressing in. Every decision she had made in the last 10 years had been safe, predictable, sensible, and yet here she was, exhausted, broke, and stuck. The envelope lay on the table, Daniel Whitmore's picture half hidden beneath the contract summary. No love, no intimacy, just a performance, a professional lie with a very real reward. At 2 in the morning, she typed a message, 2 words, simple and terrifying. "I'm in." Seattle loomed like a steel giant against the overcast sky, the Iowan glass towers catching the weak afternoon light. Emily adjusted her coat as she stepped out of the car, her hands shaking despite the layers she wore. The mansion on the hill was nothing short of cinematic, a modern fortress of glass and concrete, pristine and cold, It was the kind of place that screamed wealth without whispering warmth. Rachel was waiting at the entrance, dressed in corporate black, her expression unreadable. "Ready?" she asked. Emily nodded, though she wasn't, not even close. But this wasn't the kind of decision one could prepare for. You either jumped or you didn't. Inside, the mansion was silent. Every footstep echoed. Expensive art lined the hallway. Pieces Emily recognized from books she taught in class, work she had never imagined she would see in person. She had no time to marvel. Rachel led her down a corridor to a private study. The door opened silently, and there he was, Daniel Whitmore. He stood behind a massive oak desk, arms crossed, eyes sharp like winter. He did not rise, did not offer her hand. He only observed her, as if trying to determine whether she was a machine built correctly for a specific task. "You're early," he said. "Traffic was light," Emily replied, unsure if she should sit or stand. She chose to stand. He gestured to the chair opposite his. She sat slowly, the silence stretching, until Rachel stepped in and placed a thick folder on the desk. Daniel opened it, flipped to the top page, and pushed it toward her. "This is the contract." Emily's eyes dropped to the text. Legal jargon, tight clauses, a wall of cold black ink. She had expected something formal, but this was something else. Meticulously crafted, ruthless in tone. It outlined everything: dates, behavior expectations, public appearances, shared residence. No romantic entanglements, no physical intimacy. No deviation from the script. Violations would result in financial penalties. A separate section detailed what would happen in case of a breach: termination fees, reputational damage clauses, even a non-disclosure agreement that spanned decades. "I assume you have questions?" Daniel said, voice flat. Emily looked up. "A few." Rachel stood at her side, a quiet reminder that this was not a discussion, it was a transaction. Daniel leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. "You'll move in here within 72 hours. We have two major events in the next month, a charity gala and my grandfather's birthday. You will attend both as my wife. You will wear what we provide. You will speak only as needed. You will not give interviews. You will not befriend the staff. You will not access the third floor under any circumstance." Emily blinked. "Why?" "Because that's not your role." The sentence dropped, like an iron weight between them. Emily's mouth opened, but she closed it again. She flipped a few pages. The payment clause was crystal clear: $125,000 up front, the rest upon fulfillment of the agreement. 1 year, appearances only, no exceptions. "What happens after the year?" she asked. "You disappear. Quietly, with your money and no further obligation." His tone was final. She glanced at Rachel, who gave her a silent nod. "And your grandfather?" Emily asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "He believes in appearances. He's old-fashioned. This marriage is the only way I can secure what's legally mine." "And why me?" Daniel's gaze sharpened. "You're unremarkable enough to be believable, but with enough intelligence to follow rules. You don't belong to the media, and you have no past scandals. You're safe." Emily flushed, not sure whether to feel insulted or grateful. "That's blunt." "It's honest. This isn't personal. It's practical." She turned to the final page, where the signature line waited, her name already typed beneath the blank space. Her future, bought and sold for a price she had never imagined would be offered to her. A part of her recoiled. Another part, a louder, desperate part, wanted to grab the pen and sign before someone took the offer away. She hesitated. "And if I say no?" Daniel's voice didn't change. "Then Rachel escorts you out and we never speak again. You go back to Portland, to your bills, to your life." There was no threat, no emotion, just brutal simplicity. Emily reached for the pen. Her fingers trembled slightly. She signed. The letters of her name looked strange on the page, as if they belonged to someone else. Rachel slid the folder away, satisfied. "Your advance will be wired to your account within 24 hours, Daniel said. "Someone bring your bags inside on the day you move in." "I'll have Emily Rose." Slowly, her knees stiff. She wanted to say something, anything, but nothing felt appropriate. Not here, not in front of him. Rachel walked her to the door in silence. As they stepped into the grey afternoon, Emily exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. "You did the right thing," Rachel said. Emily didn't answer. That night she lay awake in her apartment, surrounded by packed boxes and unopened wine bottles. Her phone chimed. A notification. The deposit had been made. $125,000. Real. Irrefutable. Her entire net worth had changed in an instant. Still, sleep would not come. She had signed a contract that bound her to a man who viewed her as a prop. Her life was now a performance. One mistake, one step out of line, and it could all unravel. The rain returned in quiet rhythms against the window pane. Emily stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a cyclone of doubt and calculation. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Emily Whitmore in every public eye. Only her heart would know the truth. Emily had never worn a dress that cost more than an entire month's salary. But that night, draped in midnight blue silk and diamond earrings she hadn't dared to touch with her bare hands, she looked every bit the role she was now required to play. The mirror reflected a woman she didn't quite recognize. Elegant, composed, breathtaking. A stranger. The limousine ride from the Whitmore estate to the Grand Pacific Ballroom was conducted in silence. Daniel sat beside her, a flawless tuxedo outlining his stiff posture. He hadn't spoken since they left the house, his focus fixed on his phone. His profile was all harsh lines and cool detachment, like he had been carved from marble. Emily tried to breathe evenly, tried not to betray the tremor in her hands. Her entire existence had shifted overnight, and now she was heading straight into a room filled with the kind of people who would see through her with a single glance if she misstepped. As the car pulled to a stop, Daniel finally looked up. "Remember what we discussed. Touch my arm when we walk in. Smile, but not too wide. Speak when spoken to. You're not here to charm anyone. You're here to be my wife." His words were surgical, and yet they clung to her skin like frost. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. The doors opened. Flashbulbs sparked. Photographers lined the entrance like vultures waiting for the scent of scandal. Daniel stepped out first, tall and composed, then reached back to take her hand. His grip was firm but impersonal, a gesture meant for the cameras. Emily followed, and together they descended into the world of the elite. The ballroom shimmered with golden light and crystalline laughter. Wealth hung in the air like expensive perfume. Waiters in white gloves drifted between clusters of perfectly dressed guests, offering champagne and canapes. Emily's heels clicked softly on the marble as they made their entrance, all eyes turning toward them. She saw it immediately, the quiet scrutiny, the calculating stares. Daniel leaned toward her and whispered through clenched teeth, "They believe you. They're trying to decide if the next hour passed like a play rehearsed 100 times." But performed without rehearsal. Daniel introduced her to board members, donors, and family acquaintances with the grace of a man who had lived in this world his entire life. Emily responded as instructed, polite, brief, pleasant. She touched his arm when expected, laughed gently when required. Her wine glass remained half full. Her eyes scanned constantly, alert for any sign that she had gone too far or not far enough. But the hardest part wasn't the strangers. It was the woman standing beside the bar, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. Sophia Barrett, Daniel's personal assistant, sharp as a scalpel and twice as cold. Her eyes followed every move Emily made, her lips pursed in skepticism. When Emily accidentally caught her gaze, Sophia didn't look away. She simply tilted her head as if already composing a report in her mind. During a lull in conversation, Emily finally asked, "Is she always like that?" Daniel glanced toward Sophia, then back at Emily. "She's protective of the company, and of me." Emily didn't ask which mattered more. As the evening wore on, the masks grew heavier. Emily felt the weight of every lie she told, every smile she forced. Yet something strange began to happen. A small group of women at a corner table waved her over while Daniel was pulled into conversation with a senator. They were wives of Whitmore board members, stylish, practiced, but surprisingly welcoming. One of them, a redhead named Claire, leaned closer and said, "We've been watching you. You hold your own better than most." Emily laughed nervously. "I've had good coaching." Claire smiled knowingly. "A performance. You'll need it." Being married to a Whitmore isn't just a relationship. It's the words hit Emily harder than expected. Claire didn't know how literal that was. A bell chimed gently. The ballroom's music lowered as an announcer called for attention. A spotlight turned toward Daniel, who now stood behind a microphone. Emily felt her stomach tighten. "My grandfather couldn't be here tonight," Daniel said, his voice steady and commanding. "This foundation was his life's work, and I intend to honor it." But he paused, then motioned toward Emily. "And I'd also like to introduce someone else, who's become important to me. My wife, Emily." The spotlight shifted. 100 eyes turned to her. She rose slowly, her skin burning under the lights. She smiled, nodded, sat back down. The applause was polite, restrained, tinged with curiosity. Afterward, Daniel returned to her side. His voice was low. "Well done, they believe it. For now." Emily wanted to feel proud, but something cold coiled inside her instead. She had passed the first test, but the feeling of accomplishment was hollow. She wasn't sure if it was the lies or the way Daniel's eyes had barely softened, even when he called her important. Later that night, as they returned to the mansion, Daniel unbuttoned his cufflinks in the front hall, not looking at her. "You'll need a new dress for next week's gala. I'll have it arranged." Emily set her purse down on the table. "I can choose my own." He looked at her then, not angry, not even surprised, just calculating. "If you want to blend, and let the people who know how handle it." Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. The moment passed like a shadow. She went up to her assigned bedroom alone. The room was beautiful but impersonal. No photos, no books, no warmth, just walls and silence. She sat on the edge of the bed and kicked off her heels, her feet aching from the hours spent pretending to belong. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message from Rachel. "You were perfect. They're already talking about how natural you look together." Emily stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Perfect. Natural. 2 words that had never felt less true. She lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes, wondering how long it would take before the performance stopped being a role and started becoming a prison. The Whitmore Estates country house was nothing like the sterile, towering mansion in Seattle. Nestled in the hills outside of Yakima, it stretched low and wide across the land, its stone walls weathered but dignified, like a relic from an older, slower time. The surrounding vineyards and horse paddocks suggested a life far removed from the rigid world of corporate meetings and media appearances. Yet even here, Emily felt the weight of the contract in every breath she took. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. A staff of 4 waited at the circular driveway, coordinated and expressionless. Daniel stepped out first, always the figure of control, and Emily followed, her suitcase already taken from her hand before she could offer thanks. It was their first overnight together since the arrangement began, and she felt the shift in energy immediately. This wasn't just an appearance, it was immersion. Dinner the first night was served in a formal dining room that felt too large for 2 people. The table stretched long enough to seat 20, but it was only them, seated at opposite ends, the clinking of cutlery the only sound. No conversation. Just the soft rustle of napkins and the distant hum of crickets outside. Emily tried to engage. "This place is beautiful, peaceful." Daniel did not look up from his plate. "It was my mother's favorite." She held onto the thread. "Did you come here often as a child?" He paused, setting his fork down slowly. "You're breaking a clause." Emily blinked. "What?" "No personal questions." His voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it. Was in the agreement. That Emily's appetite vanished. She stared at the linen cloth in front of her, the words hanging like smoke between them. She hadn't meant to break any rules. It had been instinct, human curiosity, a basic gesture of connection. She had forgotten for just a moment that they were pretending. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. "You need there." He left without another word. "You'll be staying in the East Wing. You'll find everything." Emily didn't eat another bite. She sat alone in the room for several minutes, listening to the grandfather clock tick away her mistake. The next morning, the tension remained like fog that refused to lift. Daniel didn't appear for breakfast. Instead, Sophia arrived. She was not in her usual city attire, but in casual riding clothes, her presence as crisp as ever. "There's a schedule," she said, handing Emily a folder. "Today you'll walk the grounds. There's a tour planned with the head gardener. This afternoon you're expected to join Mr. Whitmore for tea on the terrace. Keep to the script." Emily looked up. "And if I accidentally ask about his childhood again?" Sophia didn't smile. "Then I advise you start reading the fine print more carefully." The morning passed slowly. Emily walked the gardens with the head gardener, a quiet man named Glenn, who spoke fondly of the plants but avoided any discussion of the family. She tried to immerse herself in the landscape, the lavender beds, the antique fountains, the willow, trees swaying softly in the breeze, but the beauty only highlighted the chill between her and Daniel. By afternoon, she sat stiffly at a wrought iron table on the stone terrace, the teapot between them untouched. Daniel wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie. He looked younger like this, but no less distant. Emily sipped her tea, and finally said, he looked at her unreadable. "Relationship, Emily, it's a role. I know, but roles can evolve." I didn't mean to overstep. It was a simple question. Simple questions lead to complications. This is not this one. The finality in his tone silenced her, and yet, beneath the surface, she saw something else. Not anger, fear. There was something he didn't want her to find, something locked away behind every rule he enforced. That night, unable to sleep, Emily wandered the hallways of the country house. It was nearly midnight, the staff long gone to their quarters. The house creaked with age and memory. She passed old paintings, family portraits in gold frames, catching glimpses of Daniel as a boy, standing beside his parents, a woman who looked like she belonged in the past, smiling, soft. Emily paused. In front of one particular painting, Daniel as a teenager standing with a horse, his face caught between pride and sorrow. Something about it unsettled her. She reached out, touched the frame, and then she heard footsteps. Daniel stood behind her in the hallway, wearing a dark sweater and sweatpants, not the polished armor he wore in public. His eyes caught hers, and for a second, neither of them spoke. "I couldn't sleep," Emily said. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Neither could I." There was silence, a soft kind of one. Emily turned back to the painting. "You look different here." He didn't respond. "I didn't mean to upset you. Yesterday I wanted to know something real." Another pause. Then, surprisingly, Daniel said, "She died when I was 15. My mother." Emily looked at him. The admission was quiet, fragile. It wasn't a part of the script. "She loved this house," and he continued, voice low. "After she passed, my father avoided it. I started coming here alone. It was the only place that didn't expect anything from me." Emily wanted to reach out to bridge the space between them, but something in his stance warned her not to, so she just nodded. "It still feels like hers." Daniel met her gaze. For the first time, there was no frost in his eyes, only the weight of memory. "Good night, Emily," he said, before turning and walking away. She watched him go, her heart unexpectedly heavy. He had broken the rules too, just a little. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. The silence between Emily and Daniel after that night in the hallway was not the cold, deliberate distance of before. It was quieter, filled with something else, an unspoken awareness that the line between performance and reality had been blurred, even if just for a moment. Emily didn't press him further. She kept to the contract, played the part, and allowed the memory of his confession to settle like a seed buried under frost, waiting. They returned to Seattle on Monday. The routine resumed with military precision. Breakfasts were shared but never discussed. Events were planned and executed without error. Emily received her schedule from Sophia each morning, tailored to match. The public image of the perfect wife, charity visits, fashion fittings, and etiquette consultations with a woman who barely disguised her disdain. And always at the center of it all, Daniel, reserved, calculating, present but unreachable. It was during a quiet afternoon in the library, while pretending to read an issue of Architectural Digest for an impromptu magazine feature, that Emily first spoke with Arthur, the head butler of the Whitmore household. He was in his early 70s, tall and composed, with a manner both respectful and fatherly. Unlike the other staff who kept their eyes down and their thoughts hidden, Arthur watched her with a kind of cautious empathy. "I remember when Mr. Whitmore was a boy," he said softly as he arranged books behind her. "He used to sit by that fireplace with a pile of sketchbooks. Told me once he wanted to be an architect." Emily looked up. "I didn't know that." Arthur hesitated, then gave her a gentle smile. "There's much you're not supposed to know." She closed the magazine and set it aside. "Arthur, can I ask you something? Off the record." He raised an eyebrow. "Everything in this house is off the record. Why the marriage? Why now? What's really going on?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He adjusted a book on the shelf, then said, "Mr. Whitmore Sr., Daniel's grandfather, is a man of strong principles. He believes in legacy, bloodline, appearances. When he revised the family will 5 years ago, he made it clear that the company would not be passed on to an unmarried heir. Said a man who cannot build a family cannot run one." Emily frowned. "But Daniel's already running the business." "Not completely," Arthur said. "He manages most of the operations, yes. But full ownership of the company and the estate requires the transfer of primary control. That means shares, titles, voting rights, all of it. And that only happens if the conditions of the will are met before the old man dies." Emily sat back. The pieces began to fall into place. "So the marriage is a key?" Arthur nodded. "The final key. And the grandfather, is he dying?" A pause. "He's in the hospital, terminal, days, perhaps weeks." Emily swallowed. "And Daniel doesn't want to lose the company. He wants to prove something," Arthur said more quietly. "Money. But I don't believe it's about that night." Emily could barely sleep. She lay awake in the vast bedroom, the ceiling shadows shifting with the headlights from passing cars below. If the will truly required a marriage and the clock was ticking, then every moment they spent pretending had a purpose beyond appearances. But why hadn't Daniel told her? Why hide the urgency? In the morning, while Daniel was in a conference, Cole and Sophia was managing logistics for the upcoming gala, Emily returned to the library. She found Arthur dusting shelves and approached him with a whisper. "Has Daniel visited his grandfather?" Arthur looked up. "No." "Why?" Arthur hesitated. "That's not for me to say." "But he knows he's dying." "Yes." "Then why hasn't he gone?" Arthur lowered his duster and faced her fully. "Because the last time they spoke, the old man told him he was a disappointment, that the family name deserved better." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "And Daniel still wants to prove himself?" Arthur smiled faintly. "Or spite him. Hard to say with those two." Later that day, Emily found herself in the elevator with Daniel on the way to a press briefing. The tension in the small space was sharper than usual. She glanced at him, studied the rigid lines of his jaw, and finally said, "I know about the will." He didn't look at her. "Of course you do. And about your grandfather." Still, nothing. "You could have told me." He turned, finally meeting her eyes. "You're not here to understand, you're here to comply. But I'm part of this now, whether you like it or not." The elevator doors opened. He stepped out without another word, leaving her to follow. The press briefing went as expected. Flashes, scripted smiles, careful words. Emily stood beside Daniel like a statue carved for display, the perfect wife in the perfect outfit. But beneath the surface, her thoughts churned. He had built walls around himself so high that even necessity couldn't make him lower them. And yet he hadn't denied what she said. He hadn't told her to stop asking. That night, as she undressed, for bed, she found a note tucked into the drawer of her nightstand. No signature, just a line in careful handwriting. He doesn't want the company, he just doesn't want to lose. The note sent a chill through her. Who had written it? Arthur? Someone else? And what did it mean exactly? She lay awake long. After the lights were off, the city humming softly beyond the glass. Her mind turned over the new truth like a stone in her palm, rough, unexplained, but undeniable. The inheritance was a test, not of loyalty, but of identity. Daniel wasn't fighting for control of a company. He was fighting to reclaim something from a man who had stripped him of dignity long ago. A man now dying, surrounded by silence, while his grandson played at marriage in the spotlight. Emily realized, perhaps for the first time, that her presence in Daniel's life wasn't just about convenience. She was part of a much deeper battle, and she wasn't sure which side she was on anymore. The Whitmore estate was in full bloom. For the birthday of Eleanor Whitmore, Daniel's mother, whose celebration was set to be one of the season's most talked about affairs. The guest list was a blend of Seattle's oldest families and the newest faces in business, fashion, and politics. Everything was meticulously arranged. The floral arrangements were curated by a renowned French botanist, the champagne was imported from a single vineyard in the north of Italy, and the catering came from a chef with 3 Michelin stars. The event was less a birthday party and more a demonstration of lineage, power, and curated affection. Emily had rehearsed her lines, practiced her smile, and selected the perfect dress weeks earlier. Eleanor herself had sent a personal message approving it, which, according to Sophia, was the closest thing to a blessing anyone in the family ever received. Daniel, as always, maintained his role with robotic precision, offering compliments that felt rehearsed and gestures that remained within the boundaries of the contract. As guests arrived in sleek cars and designer gowns, Emily stood beside Daniel, in the grand reception room, performing her role with effortless grace. She had grown used to the weight of eyes on her, the quiet assessments whispered behind raised glasses. She knew her job was not to be memorable, but to be convincing. The moment Olivia walked in, the air shifted. She appeared at the entrance, in a crimson dress that clung to her with deliberate elegance, a single diamond pendant at her throat, and confidence radiating from every step. Her entrance was silent, but it drew every gaze like a spark in a dark room. Emily didn't know her, but she knew who she was instantly. No one had said she would be here, and yet no one seemed surprised either. Olivia belonged. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emily felt it before she saw it. His hand, resting lightly on her back, dropped away. Olivia approached slowly, deliberately, her smile poised like a blade. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft, intimate, and just loud enough. "I didn't expect to see you here. Then again, I suppose I should have." Daniel nodded once. "Olivia." Her eyes flicked to Emily. "And this must be the wife." Emily extended her hand. "Emily Whitmore." Olivia's handshake was cool and brief. "So you did get married. Funny, I hadn't heard a word." "It was private," Daniel said. Olivia smiled at Emily, as though she found the explanation amusing. "I imagine it was." Emily forced a smile, aware that everyone within earshot was now pretending not to listen. Olivia leaned closer. "Daniel always did hate publicity. Though when we were engaged, his mother had already started planning the wedding 6 months in advance." Emily's smile faltered. "You were engaged?" Daniel stepped in. "That's enough." Olivia's smile never wavered. "Oh, of course, I didn't mean to stir up anything. It's just lovely to see him with someone again. It's been, what, 2 years since the breakup?" Emily looked at Daniel, but he didn't correct her. He didn't deny anything. He didn't speak at all. Olivia touched his arm lightly. "I'll let you get back to hosting, but we should talk, Daniel. Soon." She walked away, disappearing into the crowd with the grace of someone who knew exactly how much damage she had just inflicted. Emily felt the burn of every stare, every whispered question blooming in her wake. Later, away from the crowd, Emily confronted Daniel in the garden where no one could hear them. "You were engaged?" He looked at her, unflinching. "Yes. And you didn't think to mention that before throwing me into a room with her?" "It wasn't relevant to the contract." Emily laughed bitterly. "Of course. The contract. Everything comes back to that. She has no bearing on what we're doing here. But she does, Daniel. She knew everything about you. The way she looked at you, it wasn't over for her. She's manipulative, and you let her be here, She's still close to my mother. Emily stared at him. Do you still love her? He hesitated. Not long, but long enough. No. It wasn't convincing, not entirely, and the silence that followed it felt too heavy to be called empty. That night, after the last guest had left and the house was returning to its usual hush, Emily found Eleanor in the conservatory, sipping wine beneath the hanging orchids. The older woman waved her over without pretense. She played it well. Didn't she? Eleanor asked. Emily didn't pretend to misunderstand. Olivia. She was always theatrical, but loyal in her own way. Daniel never understood that. He only sees the threat in people. Emily sat down across from her. You approved of her. I did. Still do. But not of me. Eleanor tilted her head, considering. You're useful. You've kept him in line, and you haven't embarrassed the family. That earns you more credit than you realize. Emily's throat tightened. I'm not here for credit. Eleanor's smile was faint. Of course not. Emily left the conservatory without another word. As she passed the empty corridors of the estate, she felt the hollowness grow. Olivia had slipped into the world of the Whitmores with ease because she had once been one of them. Emily, on the other hand, would always be the outsider who wandered, in through the side door. In the days that followed, Olivia lingered like smoke. She sent flowers to Eleanor, appeared at charity events where Daniel was scheduled to speak, and even managed to be photographed with him by the press, an image that Sophia quickly had removed from all official accounts. Emily kept her distance, but the unease gnawed at her. Each time she stood beside Daniel at a function, each time they touched hands for the sake of a photo, she wondered if the person he was seeing in his mind was still wearing a crimson dress and a knowing smile. One evening, she overheard Daniel on the phone in his office. The door was ajar. No, Olivia, this changes nothing. You made your choice. Don't start rewriting history now. He hung up hard, then sat in silence. Emily stepped away before he knew she had been there, but the doubt stayed with her. Because she had seen something in his eyes when he looked at Olivia, not love, not longing, but pain. And pain had roots that reached deeper than a contract. Autumn arrived subtly in Seattle, painting the city in amber tones and a chill that seeped through even the grandest stone walls of the Whitmore estate. The trees that lined the estate grounds began to shed their leaves, creating a quiet, golden world outside Emily's window. Days were growing shorter, and with each one something inside her was also shifting. The strict lines of the contract were still there, yes, unsigned boundaries that neither she nor Daniel was supposed to cross. But after Olivia's appearance and the days that followed, the space between those lines felt different, less hostile, more human. Daniel no longer corrected her for speaking outside of rehearsed situations. He didn't retreat when she asked him a casual question over breakfast or shared a story from her teaching days. He listened. Sometimes he even laughed, quietly, unexpectedly, as if it surprised him more than it did her. One morning, as the rain tapped gently on the wide glass windows of the dining room, Emily recounted a disastrous field trip she had supervised with her students the previous year. A story involving a runaway bus tire and a terrified tour guide named Frank. Daniel, who was halfway through his coffee, actually smiled. Not just a polite smile, but a real one. Frank sounds like a man who needs early retirement, he said. He quit the next day, Emily replied. I don't blame him. Daniel glanced at her over his cup. You're different in the mornings. Emily tilted her head. Is that a compliment or a warning? An observation. That was the end of it, but the warmth lingered longer than it should have. It was the kind of exchange that would have been meaningless in a real marriage, but in theirs, founded on legal obligations and fake intimacy, it felt revolutionary. Later that week, Eleanor traveled to New York for a foundation event, and Sophia took several days off to visit family. The house grew quieter, less performative. Without handlers around, Emily and Daniel moved more freely through the estate, as if the absence of witnesses allowed them to drop the invisible armor they wore every day. One evening, after a brief appearance at a fundraising gala, they returned, home early. The staff was already retired for the night, and instead of retreating to their separate corners, Daniel surprised her by suggesting they open a bottle of wine from the cellar and sit by the fire. Emily raised an eyebrow. Is this part of the role too? No cameras tonight, no press, just wine. She didn't ask more. They sat in the lounge near the west wing, a place rarely used except during holiday visits. The fireplace crackled softly, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and aged velvet. Emily tucked her legs beneath her on the antique sofa, while Daniel poured 2 glasses of deep red Bordeaux. They talked. Not about money, not about contracts, not about his grandfather or the company. They talked about books. She learned that Daniel had once devoured science fiction novels under the covers with a flashlight, that he admired Asimov and hated Bradbury. He learned that Emily had tried and failed to write her own novel in college, that she kept the manuscript, hidden in a box in her closet, unread even by herself for years. At one point he leaned back, glass in hand, and said, "Ambition kills imagination. I always thought the opposite." I never liked the assumption that Emily turned to him. "So what stopped you from pursuing what you loved?" He didn't answer immediately. The firelight flickered across his face. "Expectation," he said eventually. "Nothing left. And fear. Fear that if I failed at what I loved, there would be..." Emily nodded. She understood that too well. That night, as they said goodnight outside her bedroom door, something passed between them, unsaid but undeniable. A quiet current of acknowledgement. They were, despite everything, becoming something more than what the contract had laid out. The following days felt lighter. Daniel invited her to accompany him on morning walks across the property. They didn't talk much during those walks, but the silence was companionable, unstrained. One morning, as the fog still hung over the hedges, Daniel stopped by the stables and introduced her to an old mare named Iris. "She belonged to my mother," he said, brushing the horse's mane gently. Had more sense than most people she knew. She used to say Iris. Emily stroked the mare's neck. "She seems kind." "She is." Daniel paused, then added, "You are too." She looked at him, startled. He rarely gave compliments, especially ones that sounded so unfiltered. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and moved on, as if embarrassed by the admission. But Emily stayed with Iris for a few minutes longer, her heart quietly thudding with questions she wasn't ready to ask. One night, rain hammered the estate with relentless force. A storm had rolled in unexpectedly, and the power flickered twice before cutting out entirely. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the hallways in a dim glow. The staff had already left for the evening, and Emily wandered the halls looking for candles. She found Daniel in the study, lighting a fireplace by hand. He glanced up. "Well, this is dramatic," she said, stepping inside. "I suppose this is what people used to call ambiance." They ended up sitting together in the flickering light, a single candle between them on the low table. Without phones, without distractions, there was only conversation and laughter. She told him about her childhood fear of thunderstorms. He told her how he once tried to fix a blown fuse as a teenager and knocked out the electricity for the entire estate. When the power finally returned 2 hours later, they stayed by the fire. Emily shifted on the rug, turning to face him. "What happens if we stop pretending?" Daniel didn't answer. He simply looked at her, eyes unreadable, but softer than before. The moment passed. Neither of them spoke again. But Emily knew something had changed. The distance between them was shrinking, and for the first time since she had signed the contract, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted it to end. The mornings at the Whitmore estate had become a ritual. Emily found unexpectedly comforting. The light through the tall windows, the soft clink of fine china, the silence not as cold as before. It all formed a routine that made the unreal feel almost ordinary. Daniel no longer seemed like a stranger playing a part beside her. His presence was something steady, a quiet force she had come to rely on more than she cared to admit. The sharp angles of their arrangement had softened into something warmer, something dangerously close to real. But routines are fragile things, easily broken by the unexpected. It began with a document, an unassuming envelope slipped beneath her door one rainy afternoon, the name of a downtown law firm stamped in silver ink, At first, Emily thought it might be another contract addendum, something from Sophia. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were printed emails, dated 2 months prior, exchanged between Daniel and his legal team. She read them once, then again, her fingers trembling as the truth began to unfold. In the messages, Daniel had asked for the legal implications of ending the marriage early after the transfer of estate ownership. The responses were clear. After the inheritance was finalized, a quiet annulment could be arranged without public spectacle, and Emily could be compensated with a final payment, as stipulated in a private clause she had never seen. Her heart pounded. She felt sick. The entire time, every shared moment, every accidental smile, every conversation by the fire, had it all been a tactic, a calculated performance to keep her in place until the deadline passed? The betrayal, though professional in design, felt intimate in impact. Emily clutched the papers and sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts spiraling. It wasn't just the emails, it was the silence, the things he never said, the parts of the contract she had trusted without question. She confronted him that evening. Daniel was in his office reviewing files on his laptop when she stormed in. He looked up, startled by her expression, and set the computer aside. "What is it?" Emily dropped the documents on his desk. He didn't look down. His eyes held hers. "That's not an answer. Tell me these are fake. Where did you get these?" Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Then finally he exhaled. "They're real." She felt the breath leave her. "So it was all planned? You were going to get the company and then I'd disappear quietly, legally, like I never existed." "It wasn't like that." "No." "Then explain it to me. Explain how you made me feel like I mattered, like we were building something real, all while planning to erase me the moment I was no longer useful." His voice was calm, but she heard the crack in it. Of this started to change. It was a contingency, written long before any "so it did change." He looked away. "I didn't expect you. That's not good enough." Her voice rose. "You should have told me. I deserved that." He stood now, stepping around the desk, but she backed away. "Don't. Emily. I trusted you, Daniel. God help me, I actually started to believe there was something real between us." He reached for her, but she turned and walked out. For 2 days, she avoided him. Meals were taken in her room. Events were skipped, and Sophia, for once, said nothing about the broken schedule. Emily felt hollow, angry, betrayed not just by Daniel, but by herself, for letting down her guard, for wanting something more. But the contract had not ended, and that was its cruelest clause. On the 3rd day, Sophia knocked on her door with the expression of someone delivering a sentence. "You're expected at the hospital. The family is gathering." Emily blinked. "The hospital?" "Mr. Whitmore Sr. is near the end." The air froze. She arrived with Daniel, neither of them speaking during the drive. The hospital. Suite was private, adorned with flowers and quiet respect. Eleanor was already there, standing at the foot of the bed, her expression unreadable. Olivia stood near the window, arms crossed, but silent for once. The old man was frail. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Emily stood at the edge of the room, unsure of her place in this gathering of ghosts and legacy. But when Daniel moved to the bedside, something inside her cracked again. He knelt, took the old man's hand, and whispered something she couldn't hear. She watched as a flicker of pain crossed Daniel's face, subtle but real. He didn't cry, he didn't tremble, but the walls around him lowered, just for a moment. Emily turned away, giving him privacy he didn't ask for, but perhaps needed. Afterward, in the hallway, Eleanor approached her. "You stayed," Emily nodded. "I'm still under contract. Even now. Especially now." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "He cares. He just doesn't know how to show it. He's colder than his father ever was, but not as hollow." Emily didn't respond. Back at the estate that evening, Daniel knocked on her door for the first time in days. She opened it, hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered quietly, looked at her like he had something rehearsed, then abandoned the idea. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the emails, for everything. She crossed her arms. Sorry doesn't undo what you planned. But I didn't follow through. No, he agreed. You would have. He didn't deny. I meant to control everything, he said. To keep it clean, professional, safe, but somewhere along the way it stopped being a performance for me. And I didn't know how to deal with that. I still don't. Emily's voice was low. Then what do we do now? Daniel looked at her, the mask gone. We rewrite the script. But trust, once broken, does not rebuild overnight. It demands more than apologies and rewritten lines. It demands honesty, vulnerability, time. Emily wasn't ready to forgive. But for the first time, she saw Daniel not as the man who hired her, but as someone struggling to become the man he wished he could be. And she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to help him find his way. The hospital corridors had a sterile silence that clung to everything. The scent of antiseptic, the mechanical hum of unseen machines, the low murmur of distant voices, all of it created a bubble around the Whitmore patriarch's final hours. Emily stood near the vending machine, untouched coffee in hand, trying to catch her breath from the weight of the previous days. The confrontation with Daniel had left bruises that didn't show on the skin, and the encounter at the hospital had scraped fresh wounds beneath her chest. She needed air, distance, something to ground her. She stepped outside into the cold. The late afternoon had cast a grey light across the parking lot, and the drizzle had begun to fall again, soaking the pavement in that persistent Seattle way. She leaned against the wall, the coffee cooling in her hand, when a voice cut through the stillness. He wasn't always like this, you know. Emily turned to see a man standing just beyond the covered awning. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s, with dark hair slicked back from the rain and a tailored coat that looked lived in, not designed. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. "I'm sorry," she said, wary. "The man inside, the one you married, Daniel." He offered a faint, knowing smile, surprised. "You look..." Emily stiffened. "I don't think we've met." "We haven't." He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Michael." She didn't take it. He nodded at her caution. "Fair enough. I wouldn't trust me either." Something in his voice, half joke, half truth, made her falter. "Michael Whitmore." "Michael who?" Emily stared at him, her mind reeling. Michael tilted his head. "Before you showed up." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not possible. Daniel doesn't have a brother. He doesn't, not publicly. That was part of the deal. I was erased long. Why are you telling me this? Because you're inside the machine now, and you deserve to know what you're actually part of." Emily didn't speak. She didn't move. Her grip on the coffee cup tightened. Michael continued. "Our father had an affair. My mother was the result. Technically, I'm the firstborn, but in a family like this, blood doesn't mean much if it doesn't come with a last name that matches the one on the checks." She frowned. "You think you're entitled to the inheritance?" He gave a short laugh. "Entitlement? No, I don't want the empire. I never did. But Daniel, he's not doing this for money. He's doing it to keep me out." Emily blinked. "Why would he care if you have nothing to gain?" "Because of our grandfather. The old man saw potential in me once, threatened to change the will. Said I had more heart than Daniel ever showed. That's when everything changed." Emily tried to make sense of it. "So Daniel created this marriage to prove himself? To beat you?" "To beat a ghost," Michael said, stepping back into the rain. "Define anymore. I think he forgot what it was years ago. He's fighting for something he can't." Emily shook her head. "Why tell me now?" "Because you're the only part of this that feels real. You walk like someone who hasn't sold their soul yet." He started to walk away. She called after him. "Wait." He paused. "Why are you really here?" Michael turned slightly, his voice lower. To watch it burn, or maybe to see if someone can stop." Then he disappeared into the rain. Emily stood there for several minutes, her mind churning. Could it be true? A hidden brother, a repressed lineage, a vendetta buried beneath polished suits and corporate ambition. The story sounded like fiction, except nothing in her life had been ordinary since the day she said yes to a stranger's proposal. When she returned to the estate, Daniel was waiting. He looked tired, not just from the hospital, but from something deeper. She could see it in the slump of his shoulders, the subtle red at the corners of his eyes. He didn't speak as she entered the sitting room, but she did. "I met someone at the hospital," she said. He didn't react, but his stillness was answer enough. "Michael." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "So he's back. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he's not part of this." Emily stepped forward. "But he is, whether you want him to be or not." Daniel's voice was low. "He ruined everything. He drove a wedge into this family and then disappeared when it suited him, and now that there's something to gain, he's returned. He says he doesn't want the company. He lies." Emily hesitated. "You really think this is still about business?" Daniel looked at her, and for the first time there was something raw behind his expression. About legacy, about proving I can protect what's mine, about being enough. "It's enough for who?" she asked quietly. "Your grandfather? Your mother? Or yourself?" He didn't answer. She continued. "Michael said something else. He said you're fighting a ghost, that you don't even know what the fight is about anymore." Daniel looked away. Emily's voice broke, "Just the one in the contract." He looked at her, and his expression softened. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "Looks like. I need to know who you are, Daniel. Not just the version in the papers, not, 'I started this to win, but now I don't know what winning.'" She stepped closer, her voice firmer. "Then stop fighting shadows. Start facing the truth." He nodded, just once. That night, Emily sat by the window of her room staring into the dark. The mansion felt colder, as if the presence of secrets had drawn out the warmth. The portrait of the Whitmore family that hung outside her door seemed to watch her every move now, the painted smiles more hollow than before. Daniel wasn't the villain, but he wasn't innocent either. He was a man shaped by a family legacy of silence and control, a man who had learned to build walls before he ever learned how to trust, and Michael, whether threat or warning, had cracked something open that might never be closed again. Emily understood now. The game she had entered wasn't just about inheritance, it was about identity, power, memory, and the only way out was through the very heart of everything Daniel had tried so hard to bury. The days leading up to the reading of the will passed with the heaviness of unspoken truths. The Whitmore estate, once pulsing with curated elegance, had settled into a silence that felt more like waiting. Daniel withdrew into his office for hours at a time, emerging only when necessary. Eleanor moved through the halls with a distant expression, her once sharp words now replaced by a quiet weariness, and Emily found herself in a liminal state, no longer just the hired bride, not yet something more, caught between a contract and a question of conscience. The encounter with Michael haunted her. His words, sharp, almost cruel in their simplicity, had stayed lodged in her thoughts, echoing when she least expected. He's fighting for something he can't define anymore. That sentiment held more truth than she'd been prepared to admit. Daniel was trying to win a battle that had no finish line, no trophy that could ever give back what he had lost. And yet, Emily couldn't ignore what was at stake. The inheritance, the company, the legacy of a man who had spent his entire life building empires, only to tie its future to a last-minute condition, a marriage. The condition that now hinged on her. One evening, as a storm rolled in over the city and the estate trembled with wind, Emily stood by the window in the east wing, watching rain stripe the glass. Sophia entered without knocking. "You need to prepare," she said, her tone as clipped as ever. "For what?" Sophia approached, a thick binder in hand. "The final arrangements. The announcement of inheritance will be made within 72 hours. The board will meet immediately after. Appearances are critical." Emily didn't take the binder. "Appearances? That's all this has ever been to you people." Sophia's gaze narrowed. "It's always been about control, and you were hired to help maintain it." Emily turned from the window. "You don't care what happens to him, do you?" Sophia didn't flinch. "My job isn't to care. My job is to protect the estate, the brand. That includes him whether he deserves it or not." Emily stepped closer. "Away? Then let me ask you something off the record. What happens if I walk?" Sophia hesitated. "You won't." "Why?" Because if you do, the story falls apart, and so does he. Emily stared at her, uncertain if the words were a threat or a plea. After Sophia left, Emily wandered the halls, her thoughts louder than the wind outside. She passed the grand staircase, the darkened dining room, the study where she and Daniel had first spoken about the contract. Every room held a memory. Every space carried weight. She found Daniel in the conservatory, sitting in near darkness, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. The plants rustled softly in the wind, casting shifting shadows across his face. He didn't look up as she entered. "They want me to rehearse my lines," she said. He nodded once. "I'm not surprised." She sat across from him. "But I don't know if I can do it." This time he met her gaze. "You mean finish the lie?" Emily shook her head. "I mean choose between who I said I was and who I might become." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Someone else. You've changed everything." "You've already become, that's not true." "Yes, it is. You were supposed to play a part. Now you're the only part that feels real." Emily looked away. "Michael told me something." Daniel stiffened, his jaw tightening. "He said you didn't want the company, that you just didn't want to lose." Silence. "Was he right?" Daniel's voice was rough. "But is it true? He always knew where to cut." He didn't answer right away. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. "I don't want to lose the only thing that proves I mattered," Daniel said. "The company, the estate, it's not about money. It's about legacy. My grandfather never thought I was enough. Not until I showed him I could play his game better than he ever did." Emily leaned forward. "But is that who you are, a player? Or is there something else?" He looked at her, and in that moment, the exhaustion behind his eyes made him seem both older and younger than he was. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. Emily rose and crossed the room, stopping before him. A dead man's approval. Daniel didn't move. "Then maybe it's time to stop fighting for, you said I changed things, let me do it now." She left the room before he could speak. That night, sleep came only in fragments. She paced the floor of her room, her thoughts caught in a loop of doubt and defiance. She had come into this life as an actress. She had agreed to perform. But somewhere along the way, the script had blurred. The person she was pretending to be had started to become the person she was. And now she faced a choice that could not be undone. She could expose the truth, reveal the contract, the arrangement, everything, and risk the collapse of the Whitmore legacy. She could walk away, sacrificing the final payment and any hope of a future with Daniel, or she could stay. Finish the performance, seal the inheritance, and lose a piece of herself in the process. Each path had a cost. In the morning, she stood before the mirror in her room, dressed for a meeting with the estate lawyers. Her reflection was flawless, polished, exactly what the role demanded. But her eyes were tired, her shoulders stiff. She looked like a woman trapped between choices. Daniel knocked once before entering. He didn't speak at first. He looked at her, then at the briefcase in his hand. "I have the final documents," he said. "You have until tomorrow to decide." Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if I walk, then I lose everything. And if I stay, I lose you." His voice broke slightly on the last word. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I didn't plan for you, but you're the only thing I don't regret." She watched him go, the door closing quietly behind him. Alone again, Emily opened the briefcase. Inside was the amended contract, simple, elegant, damning. All it required was her signature to complete the legacy Daniel had been chasing his entire life. But her name, written at the bottom, would also mean giving up the truth. She sat at the desk, pen in hand, heart racing. The hardest choice wasn't between Daniel and herself. It was between the truth and the lie they had both learned to live inside. The air inside the law offices of Whitmore, Crane, and Adler felt heavier than usual, weighed down not by weather but by anticipation. The suite on the top floor of the Whitmore Tower had been reserved for the family's private legal matters for decades. Now, with the passing of Frederick Whitmore, Its walls would witness the unraveling of one of Seattle's oldest dynasties. The final reading of the will was scheduled for 2 o'clock sharp, and by 1:55 everyone who mattered had arrived. Emily sat beside Daniel at the long mahogany table, the leather chair beneath her too stiff, too foreign. Eleanor was already seated at the far end, her posture composed but her fingers betraying a faint tremble. Several board members and distant relatives sat quietly along the walls, present more for observation than inclusion. Even Sophia had taken a rare seat at the table, her expression carved in stone, and near the window, leaning against the frame. As though he had no stake in the outcome at all, stood Michael. His presence drew subtle glances, not all of them welcome, but no one challenged it. When the head attorney, a grey-haired man named Richard Langford, entered the room, silence fell. He wore a sober expression and carried a thick folder that bore the weight of generations. He greeted the room briefly, then took his seat at the head of the table and opened the file. "This is the last will and testament of Frederick William Whitmore, signed and sealed on the 12th of June, Langford began, his voice steady. A revised version of previous documents with clauses added at his sole discretion. Daniel sat upright, his hand resting just inches from Emily's. She didn't reach for it. Langford continued through the expected items: charitable donations to specific institutions, bequests to former employees, property transfers to extended family members. None of it surprised anyone. Then came the part that did. "To my grandson Daniel Charles Whitmore," Langford read, "I leave the controlling interest in Whitmore Holdings, including all shares, rights and entitlements, contingent upon the conditions set forth in Clause 13. A murmur swept through the room. Langford turned the page. "Clause 13. My grandson shall be entitled to inherit control of the family company and estate only if he is legally married at the time of my passing and can demonstrate 1 full calendar year of continuous cohabitation and conjugal partnership with his spouse." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel stared at the lawyer, his composure cracking at the edges. "What did you say?" Langford looked up. "It appears your grandfather modified the will several months ago. The condition has changed. The marriage must be not only legal, but sustained for a full year with documented cohabitation and conjugal intent." Eleanor leaned forward. "That's absurd. He never mentioned that." Langford nodded. "He kept the revision private. The document is valid. All legal requirements were observed, witnessed, notarized. The clause stands." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her. The air rushed out of her lungs. She looked at Daniel, whose face had turned ashen. The contract they had signed, the plan they had executed so carefully, it was suddenly insufficient. Michael let out a low whistle from the window. "Looks like the old man played his last card after all." Langford ignored him. "In the absence of fulfillment of Clause 13, the estate's control will be held in a trust managed by a board of trustees until a suitable heir is determined or the condition is met." Daniel stood abruptly. "This is a trap." Langford raised a brow. "It is a legally binding testament." Emily watched as Daniel turned away from the table, running a hand through his hair, silent fury building behind his eyes. Everything he had orchestrated, every calculated move, had been undone by a single hidden clause. And now the only way to salvage his inheritance was to stay married to her for another full year. And not just married, cohabiting, sharing a life that was supposed to be temporary. Langford cleared his throat. "There is one final note, a handwritten addendum." He opened an envelope and unfolded a single page. "Daniel," he read aloud, "you were always determined to win. But power without connection is hollow. I hope this forces you to find something real, even if it wasn't what you planned. F.W." The room was silent again, but differently now. Tension had been replaced by uncertainty. After the meeting adjourned, Daniel walked out without a word, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Emily followed at a distance, catching up only once they were outside the building. The sky was a dull steel, and the city below seemed to hold its breath. He turned to her. "Did you know?" She shook her head. "No, I swear, I didn't." He looked away. Then he got exactly what he wanted. Emily stepped forward. What does that mean? That he won. He forced me to stay in a marriage I never wanted for another year with someone He stopped himself. She finished for him. With someone you thought you could control. Daniel looked at her, something unreadable flickering across his face, cleanly, that we could both walk away. But now we can't. I thought I could end this. No. She felt something rise in her throat. Not quite anger, not quite pain, just the ache of realization. I won't live in a lie for 12 more months. Daniel's voice was low. Then what do you suggest? Emily took a breath. We stay married. But not like this. He narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? No contracts, no secrets. We try for real. Daniel stared at her. You're suggesting we turn the lie into the truth? I'm saying we find out if the truth can grow from it. He said nothing, just stared. Emily stepped closer. Company. Because otherwise we'll both lose everything. And not just that he didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. The wind picked up around them, and in that uncertain space between defeat and possibility, a new understanding began to take shape. The terms had changed. The game was no longer about inheritance. Now it was about what they were willing to become. The first morning after the will reading, the Whitmore estate felt both familiar and foreign. The same breakfast was prepared. The same staff moved in measured silence, but everything beneath the surface had changed. The marriage was no longer a temporary deception, no longer a stepping stone to fortune. It was now a condition for legacy, a test of endurance, and, by Emily's proposition, a chance at something genuine. Daniel said nothing for days. Emily gave him space, but the silence between them was no longer cold. It was contemplative, like two people standing on opposite cliffs, looking down into the same canyon, unsure if they should jump or build a bridge. When he finally emerged from the office he had buried himself in, he looked different, not just tired, but humbled. They met in the sunroom, one of the few places in the estate that hadn't been overtaken by legacy. It smelled like lemon and rosemary, and for a moment the weight of inheritance seemed far away. I've thought about what you said, Daniel began, not sitting. Emily nodded. And if we're doing this, it can't be one-sided. I won't fake it, but I won't pretend I know how to do it either. She stood too. We learn. So began a year unlike any Emily could have imagined. The contract was destroyed, literally, in a small fire on the back terrace. Sophia wasn't pleased, but she didn't interfere. Eleanor withdrew from the estate's daily affairs, leaving them to navigate the space themselves. For the first time, Emily and Daniel weren't playing roles. They were building something, undefined, uncertain, but real. The first weeks were awkward. They shared dinners where silences stretched too long. She discovered Daniel didn't know how to cook anything beyond eggs and steak, and he learned that Emily organized her books by emotional impact rather than genre or author. They argued about small things, laundry, schedules, whether the house should be decorated for the holidays. But the arguments ended with conversation, not contracts. They began spending time together, not out of obligation, but curiosity. Walks turned into hikes. Shared reading turned into debates. Once during a storm, the power went out again, and they played cards by candlelight until midnight. Daniel laughed, a real laugh, when she bluffed him with a pair of twos and won. It was the first time he looked at her without the shadow of expectation. Emily started teaching again part-time at a local community college. Daniel attended one of her lectures unannounced, sitting in the back, unnoticed until the end. He said nothing afterward, just handed her a cup of coffee and walked her to the car. But she saw something in his eyes that stayed with her. One evening, in late spring while cleaning the attic, they found a box of old family letters. Letters from Daniel's mother tucked away in envelopes worn soft by time. They read them on the floor by the attic window side by side. Emily cried when she read the last one. Daniel didn't, but his hand reached for hers without hesitation. He held it for a long time. Summer brought warmth to more than just the gardens. They began sharing a bedroom, not because they had to, but because it felt right. Emily moved her things gradually, and one day Daniel moved his own books to the shelves beside hers. There was no ceremony, just quiet understanding. They traveled, first for business, then for pleasure. A weekend in Whidbey Island where they argued over wine and ended up laughing so hard they scared away 2 deer. A trip to San Francisco where Daniel admitted he'd never ridden a bicycle, and Emily taught him on a winding path near Golden Gate Park. Trust came slowly. At times, Emily felt the old distance try to return, especially when business threatened to consume Daniel. But now he pulled back before it overtook him. He asked her advice. He listened. Once, during a shareholders' dinner, he introduced her as the reason I remember who I am, and her heart clenched not with disbelief, but recognition. Autumn came again. The estate turned gold, the same color it had been when she first arrived. But now it felt like home. The staff had grown used to seeing them in the kitchen late at night, or gardening together on Sundays. Even Sophia softened slightly, bringing Emily a book she thought she might enjoy. Michael returned briefly, staying away from the estate, but meeting Daniel for coffee in the city. When Daniel told Emily about it afterward, he didn't hide the conflict, but there was no venom in his voice, just history, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of reconciliation. One night, while lying in bed, Emily asked, "Do you think we would have found this without the will?" Daniel turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Edge, but you're the one who reached across." I was scared. "I think we were pushed to the so was I." They kissed, slow and deep, not for the cameras, not for the lawyers, but because they could, because it was real. By winter, the year was nearly complete. The estate's legal transfer had resumed under the new condition. The board had accepted it. The trust would dissolve the moment the 12 months were fulfilled. Everything was aligned. But for Emily, the reward wasn't ownership or contracts or public approval. It was him. And for Daniel, it wasn't legacy or triumph or proving someone wrong. It was her. Their story had begun as a lie. But over the course of a year, truth had taken root. Not because they were forced to pretend, but because they finally stopped pretending at all. The morning of their vow renewal arrived without fanfare. No photographers, no press releases, no choreographed arrivals. The Whitmore estate, so often defined by spectacle and expectation, was quiet. The sky was pale blue, clear and cool, with a soft breeze that whispered through the trees. It felt like a beginning, private, sacred, and wholly theirs. Emily stood in the small garden behind the east wing, where rosemary and lavender had been blooming early this season. She wore a simple white dress, the kind without corsets or jewels, chosen not to impress, but because it made her feel like herself. In her hands was a folded note she had written the night before, the words too honest to speak aloud, but too important not to remember. Across the lawn, Daniel waited beneath the old sycamore, wearing a navy suit with the top button undone. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment neither of them moved. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A memory, 1,000 memories, a shared silence that said more than language ever could. There were no guests, only Arthur standing quietly to the side, officiating not with a sermon or a script, but with a warmth that came from years of watching lives unfold within these walls. Sophia was there too, standing near the garden entrance, hands clasped loosely, her expression unreadable but present. When it came time to speak, Daniel stepped forward first. "I've given a lot of speeches in my life," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Most of them were calculated, rehearsed, constructed for maximum effect. This one isn't. I never planned to fall in love with you. I didn't even believe I was capable of it. When we met, I saw you as a solution to a problem, but you became the reason I wanted to stop solving everything like a problem. You taught me that control isn't strength, that silence isn't peace, that love doesn't come from legacy or bloodlines or contracts. It comes from choosing someone every day. And I choose you. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded her note. When I walked into this house for the first time, I thought I was pretending to be someone worth loving, someone who belonged here. I didn't realize then that pretending would teach me how to be honest. I thought you were impossible, cold, untouchable, and maybe you were. But then you let me in. You showed. Me, the boy who sketched buildings in the margins of textbooks. The man who held grief in silence and called it discipline. You let me see what no one else ever had, and I fell for that man, completely, without permission, without a plan. So this is me choosing you too. Arthur nodded once, the kind of gesture that didn't need embellishment. Then I pronounce what you already know, that you are, by your own will and words, husband and wife. Daniel pulled Emily into a kiss, not staged, not timed, but slow and sure, a kiss that spoke of every day they had earned together. When they pulled apart, the breeze stirred the petals around their feet. The reception that followed was quiet, just a dinner beneath hanging lanterns strung between the trees. Eleanor joined late, her presence unexpected but welcomed. She said little, but when she leaned in to touch Emily's shoulder and murmured, "He smiles more now," it meant everything. Michael appeared at sunset wearing a dark blazer and no tie. He didn't speak to many people, but he stood beside Daniel for a moment, exchanging a few words that no one else heard. They shook hands. It was enough. As the evening faded into twilight, Emily and Daniel danced on the grass, barefoot, moving. To the faint sound of music coming from a speaker, someone had tucked behind a flower pot. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't choreographed, but it was perfect. Later that night, lying in bed beneath the high ceilings of the estate that had once felt like a prison, Emily traced the line of Daniel's collarbone with her fingertips. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked all the time. "And if you could go back, I wouldn't change a thing," he said, "not even the lie." Emily smiled against his chest. "Neither would I." The empire Daniel inherited thrived under his leadership, but he no longer led it alone. Emily became a presence in the company not by title, but by influence. Her compassion, her insight, her refusal to let numbers replace people, these became part of the new Whitmore identity. Together they restructured not just a business but a legacy. People watched them. Whispers about the origins of their marriage never completely vanished. But it didn't matter. The story people wanted to believe had never been the real one. And the truth, messy, painful, beautiful, was theirs alone. In the city, in the press, they were the couple who had everything. But only they knew what it meant to start from nothing, to rebuild trust, to lose control, to fall in love where love had no place. And in the end, it was not the contract or the company or even the inheritance that defined them. It was the choice they made each day to stay, to build, to love. The lie had brought them together, but what they created from it was the love no one expected.